She was quite a kind of daunting figure, almost like a mythological figure, because I didn't really understand who she was. She loomed over a lot of my childhood spent in these streets around Thorndon. But it wasn't until later I really came to appreciate her literary work and her impact as a writer.
The sunlight pressed through the windows, thieved its way in, flashed its light over the furniture and the photographs. Josephine watched it.
I think that story, The Daughters of the Late Colonel, it really is one of my absolute favourite stories. And I think her sentences and the way she described light and colour and weather, particularly of Wellington, I found a way in to her work through her characters and what I could do with them in poems. Katherine, Mansfield Park. After we moved away, I often thought about the park. I thought of how I used to practice rolling sideways down the hill. I thought of grass stains on my elbows and dirt beneath my fingernails. I would ask her if she remembers this. The moon rising and shapes collapsing inside their own shadows. Birds flinging themselves out of the bush, calling out to each other in the dark. I think what I have really connected with is that sense of longing that she felt really close to the end of her life, which has always been really poignant and sad in her letters and journals about longing to return, particularly to Wellington. My life has been very, very different, but I do really relate to that. So it's fascinating, I think, to think of a writer encountering these similar questions, but 100 years earlier. If Katherine Mansfield were my best friend, 1. She would teach me how to apply winged eyeliner in a moving vehicle. She would write long, passionate texts to her high school crush, then screw up her eyes and ask me to press send quickly before she changed her mind. She would let me borrow her vintage coats, her bright silk scarves, her oversized sunglasses, and her Frida Kahlo socks. When I'm in the middle of a breakup, she would come over when I can't get to sleep, and we would sit on the floor eating Russian fudge, watching documentaries about serial killers. The years would pile up and she'd get harder to find. It's a really playful poem, and I knew that I wanted it to contain a bit of that joy and bring her into the 21st century. And it really is me turning Mansfield totally into a character. It's imagining my own version and what lots of other writers have done, particularly like Sarah Laing.
I definitely made Katherine Mansfield a character. After reading all of her journals and diaries, she came alive in my head. And yeah, she seemed quite a formidable sort of a character, actually. Like, I wasn't entirely sure if I would be cool enough to be her friend. So I think in my book, where I have Katherine Mansfield, bursting in to my present day, she is just a little bit on the disdainful side. Like, she's like, well, I will humour you, but you're not in my league, darling. So So I know that's kind of a strange thing to have an inferiority complex to a historical figure, but yes. There's not very much documentary evidence. There's just a handful of photographs, and from that handful of photographs, you have to build a character. I just tried to visually imagine sections of her life, and so I kind of storyboarded out sections of her life. And And then after I sort of had gone through, all of her diaries and some biographies, I selected parts from her life which I felt had some overlap with parts of my life. My grandmother, who had a strong connection to Katherine Mansfield, died, and in the same year I got married, and we had bought our tickets to move to New York City 6 days after terrorists flew into the Twin Towers. That rolled into Katherine Mansfield's time going to Paris after the bombardment, and she's staying in yet another abysmal hotel and feeling very unwell. And then, of course, bombs go off and they have to cower in the basement, and going to help in the soup kitchens and feeding all of the people who are suffering from hunger. She was important to me because she had lived in Wellington at the same time as my ancestors had lived in Wellington, but she'd obviously kind of, bridled against all of society's rules, and she'd felt that New Zealand was too small for her to be an artist and she had to go somewhere else. And that was just, an interesting idea or kind of way of being for me to explore when I was trying to figure out who I was as a writer.